Good morning, everybody. I am super pleased to be here because I'm pleased to be home. I've been living in the UK for about 15 years now, close to 15 years, and it's always great to be able to come home. One, because I know I can strike up a conversation with any stranger on the street when I get here, and I really want to thank SEMA and the group of colleagues from this conference who welcomed me to have a drink with them on Monday when I arrived. That's really great, and something that I really appreciate about being in the United States. The other thing I appreciate about being home is the fact that when I start speaking, the first question out of somebody's mouth isn't, "Where are you from? Where is that accent from?" I'm told I have an exotic American accent, and so it's nice that I don't have to answer that question in front of all of you. But third, I love being home because I can watch US television. In the UK, we get US TV shows somewhere between 2 days and 2 years after they premiere in the US. And so I'm always really, really excited to come here to see my favorite shows. And one of those shows is Pose. This is a show, it's in its second season now. If you don't know about it, it's about the transgender community in New York City in the 1980s, and it revolves around the ballroom culture. And I caught season 1 on BBC iPlayer and was really excited for season 2, but then found out they wouldn't be showing it in the UK for a while. So I was really excited to come here so I could start seeing season 2. But I started to think to myself, why is it that I really like this show? What is it about it? And I think because it's about community. It's about a community of people who had a common interest, common background, and common dreams, and have come together to support each other. And it says so much about what community really is, because community is not just about shared interests. It's about protecting each other. It's about providing agency and empowerment. And it's about self-expression. So within the culture of Pose, they have these ballroom, they have lots of different categories where people can actually exhibit their strengths and feel reinforced by a community. And I think sometimes the reason why I'm so particularly drawn to it right now is because I'm an outsider in the UK to a certain extent, and so I feel that need for community, and I kind of get it through Pose. But fast forward to today, and if you were not living in New York City in the 1980s and you were transgender, you probably didn't have a community, right? But today, through digital technology, we're able to connect with communities all over the world. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was in a place called Brighton. So it's in the south coast of the UK, and they have something called the Brighton Digital Festival. And as part of that festival, they have something called the Messy Edge. And what the Messy Edge is about exploring those who are marginalized in the digital world and what that means. And I met this woman named Kachanga, and she talked a lot about her journey. She's a creative writer, so she's not from museums, but she's a poet and creative writer. And she talked a lot about her journey, about coming out as transgender and what that meant to her, and how writing was her sense of catharsis. This is what got her through things. But it was actually only when that writing could be shared through digital technology, through digital publications, that she felt part of a community. And that community sustains her, and it's the reason why she's become a very kind of well-known and established writer in her own right these days. So we know that digital technology helps us create communities. But we also know that digital technology is just a tool, and it's a tool that can be used for good or bad. And that right now we're battling within the digital world things like cyberbullying, misinformation, surveillance, and the things that actually break communities apart. So, what we have to really consider is it's not about the technology itself, it's how we use it and our intent behind it. So I thought what I would do today is actually just show you a couple of projects that come from the UK that I think help create connectedness, help create empathy, create a sense of empowerment, and a sense of self-awareness that we need in order to create stronger communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit and run you through those, and you're going to see some video clips. And then at the end, and they're not all going to be museum-related projects. Some of them are from theater and other art forms, but I think they communicate a common message. And then after that, I'll talk a little bit about what we can do here in the room to promote these kinds of uses of digital technology that help create stronger communities. So, without further ado, connectedness. So before I start, what I want to do is ask all of you to take a deep cleansing breath. Inhale and exhale. And let's just do that again because it's good to do. What do we feel when we take a deep breath? Why do our trainers, our personal trainers, tell us to do this? Why do the people who teach us yoga and meditation tell us to do this? It's because it's about connectedness. It's about connecting the mind and the body. And we can feel our breath going in our body and going out of our body. But what happened to that collective breath? All of us in the room, what happened when we did that? And how did it affect the trees outside and the environment around us? We don't really think about those things very often, do we? We don't think about our connectedness to the natural world. But I wanted to tell you about a project that a group of visual artists in the UK, they're called Marshmallow Laser Feast. They've got the best name in the world. They did a project for the Saatchi Gallery in London, and it's called We Live in an Ocean of Air. And Marshmallow Laser Feast are really, really focused on this idea of how can digital technology help us be connected with the natural world. And they've done a series of projects over time. And this is just the one that is the most recent one that they've done. And I'll just give you, I'm going to show you a bit of clip from the experience, but it requires a lot of explanation in a sense. So it is a VR experience. You put on a headset, but you also put on a backpack that has body monitoring technology associated with it. So it tracks your breath and it tracks your pulse. And when you go into the virtual environment with 12 other people, you see yourself embodied as your pulse and as your breath. And then you are immersed in a world of trees, of a virtual forest. And you start to see the exchange of your carbon dioxide and oxygen, and you become much more connected with that virtual world and the virtual forest. Now, this is not simply a piece of documentary. They're artists, and so what they do is through this experience, you have a very visual experience that turns into you turning into molecules and the forest turning into molecules, and you're all wrapped up together in a really kind of trippy experience, I have to say. But, I mean, from my point of view, I came out of that experience feeling, in a way I hadn't before, connected with the natural world. And I think it's something really important. And I think they're really using digital technology in a really clever way to think about connectedness. So I'm just going to play a bit, their trailer from it, to just give you a bit of a sense of it. So that's We Live in an Ocean of Air. Now, the other project I want to talk about in terms of connectedness is a project that is still in prototype. I don't have any video to show you. I don't have actually any pictures to show you, although I'll just have a placeholder picture, which is a dinosaur. And hopefully you guys can see that. But it's a project that's coming out of a large-scale piece of work that's being done in the UK, and it's called the Audiences of the Future program. And it's really thinking about who are going to be the audiences of the future and how do we cater to them. And the project I wanted to talk about in relation to this research project is called Dinosaurs to Robots. And it's a partnership between the Natural History Museum in London and the Science Museum. And for any of you who've been to London before, you'll know that those two museums are right next to each other, but they're operated completely separately, different management teams, that type of thing. So there's no coordination between those organizations. But what they're trying to do is kind of think, how do we make connections between the natural world and kind of contemporary science? How do we do that? So they're creating an immersive experience that will take audiences from prehistory with the dinosaurs and move them through time into contemporary issues of automation and robotics. And part of that experience, people will interact, so they will do things within that realm, and they'll be making the sort of digital technology of the future, the robotics of the future. So it's very much something about connecting experiences, but also empowering people to envision a future world. Interesting here is that part of this project is not only to kind of connect these two museums and their geographic location, but this experience will be transportable. So they'll be able to go out into people's communities and show this work. So those museums will actually go out and travel. They'll be able to install this immersive experiences in shopping centers, community buildings all around the UK. So that is connectedness. Now let's think about empathy. How do we create a sense of empathy in the digital world? Two examples I want to show you. One, and they're both actually centered around World War II. One is an experience called Dam Busters. This is at the Royal Air Force Museum, which is in North London. And they are, like many military museums, filled with planes. Lots of planes and lots of things, a kind of big machinery. But how do you bring to life the experience of being in war? What does that feel like? Well, they explored that through this immersive virtual reality experience called Dam Busters, where you are positioned within a cockpit of a plane, and you become the pilot, and you're surrounded by your kind of your team of people who are helping you on that plane. Now, it's completely reconstructed from their own archives of and oral histories of people who were actually flying one of these flying machines. And I have to say, the experience I had of this was, it's not like a video game. I'm going to show you a clip, but it's not like a video game because you're actually in a space, a reconstructed plane space, and actually you're sitting on a chair that actually has the same vibration of what it's like when you're flying. And it's a very claustrophobic space, and the people, your team is right around you. The immediacy is, it's quite emotional, and you just come out of feeling of the experience is you feel terrified. You understand what it's like to be a young man having to go to war, to have to fly one of these planes and make these decisions. So I'm going to play a little bit a video from. Oops, sorry, that's gone the wrong way.
Stand by, chaps. I'm going to look the place over. Hello, all cooler aircraft. I'm going to attack. Down. Down. Left. Steady. All there. Coming up on Ava. One shot.
But then I want to switch gears now and talk about the Forever Project. So the Forever Project is with the National Holocaust Center in the UK. And it's all about capturing the experience of people who are survivors of the Holocaust and understanding that those people are soon not going to be with us anymore. So how do we capture what they experience? How do we engage with them? How do we make sure that the legacy of what happened lives on? And so it's a project in which they use 3D technology in order to capture some of these survivors. And they've then connected it with our artificial intelligence technology that allows you to interact and ask questions of these survivors. So I'm going to show you, this is quite a long clip. This is about 2.5 minutes, but it kind of gives you a sense of where they're going with the Forever Project.
For the best part of a century, they have lived quietly amongst us.
I was born in 1932.
Germany, in Berlin.
Brussels, in Belgium, February 1940.
Men and women sharing their powers.
Maybe that's the reason why I stayed alive, to tell the story.
The power to move.
It was such a powerful thing to hear.
Inspire.
When people come up to me and want to shake my hand.
Quite often they want to hug me.
Guide. and teach.
Don't discriminate against other people.
Think for yourself. Don't listen to propaganda.
The power to open eyes, transform lives, change their future.
Spark their imagination.
The power to build a better, kinder, safer world.
If you see anything being done which is wrong, like bullying, speak up.
Ordinary men and women with extraordinary strengths. If only they also had the power of immortality.
We soon won't be here anymore.
I do find the energy draining from me.
Now, through the power of 3D technology, we can all keep their stories alive.
Keep our words alive.
And try to make the world a little bit better.
Because these are the men and women who know the truth about mankind.
Once you dehumanize a group of people,
Even animals are kinder to each other.
I can never imagine myself scared for my life.
A truth that needs to live forever.
People come out touched and moved by the experience.
hopefully it will leave a legacy.
It's quite an incredible project.
Truth forever. Truth forever. Forever.
So that's the Forever Project. And one of the things that they're doing is now starting to explore. They've done this project in the context of the Holocaust Center, but they're really starting to see how this technology is catching on. And certainly there are discussions with the National Portrait Gallery around, actually, is this the future of portraiture? Not an image, not a picture, but an interactive in which we can actually interact with people who have been past leaders and engage with them in new and different ways. So that's empathy. The next thing I wanted to talk about is self-awareness. So how can digital technologies help us to be more self-aware, to understand our own biases, to understand the way in which we kind of act unconsciously, how that helps, that can contribute to breaking down communities or help us build communities. And I want to highlight two projects as part of this. One project, which I don't have a video for, but is the work of a woman named Karen Palmer. She's an artist who's really interested in how we react in times of violence. Particularly, she's interested in kind of police violence when it comes to racial minorities. And she's done lots of different projects working with neuroscientists and psychologists to provide interactive experiences in which you are forced to confront your own biases and how your own reactions cause people to react to you in a certain way. One of her most famous works was called Riot, and she currently has a piece in the Cooper Hewitt Museum called Perception I.O., which also engages, it's part of their exhibition called Face Values. And basically it uses body tracking technology and helps you understand how your own sense of gaze and your own emotions influence outcomes around you. But I wanted to show you, I do have a video of the next project, which is called Justice Syndicate. Now this is a piece of theater. It's a piece of interactive theater in which you have 12 people who are in this performance, and the 12 people in this performance are jurors. And their job is to find out and to decide whether or not the person, somebody is guilty. Through this process, they're all given an iPad. The iPad has documents, different types of evidence that the audience the participants are looking at. But the other thing that it does is it judges your perception of guilt or innocence throughout the experience of you looking at different evidence and interacting with others as part of this experience. And what they're doing is, this is an AI machine learning piece in which every successive performance that they have, so new groups of 12 people, the system understands what kind of initial perceptions can be changed with what kinds of evidence, how much evidence people need, that type of thing. So it's learning as as you get progressively further in terms of the number of performances that you have. And so I'm going to play you a little bit of a clip of people who've participated in Justice Syndicate.
There's something about that difference of experience being the point. It's part of why we make audience-centric work, because it naturally invites different approaches, perspectives and experiences. It's naturally polyphonic. The people in this room need to reach a verdict, sure, but that doesn't mean setting aside everything that makes them different. They have to learn to coexist in that difference, to find a way to disagree civilly, like in life.
When people are saying, oh, that's enough evidence that he's guilty, it's kind of like, well, it's not enough evidence.
So yeah, difficult, but after a while you kind of had to yield. Yeah.
Felt like when we were disagreeing with a purpose. You know, it felt as though we were testing each other's ideas and our own ideas. You kind of were glad of the opportunity to hash it out a bit, so the disagreement felt positive.
That's Justice Syndicate. And actually that piece, which is a performance piece, it's an interactive performance piece, actually that technology has been adapted and brought into government, UK government, to use to help people make better decisions in terms of their job and roles in government and making decisions there. So next, empowerment. So how do we use digital technology to empower people? Well, there are two things I want to talk about. I want to go back to the project that I told you about before, Audiences of the Future. We have the Royal Shakespeare Company, who is working with several partners, including Epic Games, the makers of Fortnite, and several other partners, to really think about the future performance and whether or not we can empower people to help create the performances that we ultimately show. And in this, I don't have a video because it's actually being made right now. But the idea behind it is, how do you harness gaming technology, which can be done in remote locations, to allow people to make contributions that ultimately end up in a final production of an RSC show? So what they want to do is provide lots of networked capability to be able to create a performance, and then for people to be able to come together to see a performance that they've created. Now, I wanted to show, I do have an example from another project I wanted to highlight, which is a project that was done by the British Library. It's called Imaginary Cities, and it was part of their Audience Lab program. And what Imaginary Cities does is it takes maps, so within the British Library, they have lots of archived maps. They had maps of New York, Los Angeles, London, and Paris. And they engaged an artist named Michael Takeo Magruder to look at those maps and to see what he could do to engage people with the history of the development of these cities using the maps. And so what he did was he actually created a sense of an exhibition in which he was making virtual worlds based on these maps, using information given by the audiences and the evolution of time. And so that map became a 3D reconstruction of a city that could be a future city based on audiences' preferences. And this is kind of showing you some of the artwork that he was doing that was the base of those maps. But I'm going to let him, in his own words, talk about the process that he used for this project.
With David, I looked to explore this idea of taking the singular curated images from the collection and then transform them in different ways every day. So this idea of taking the singular and creating an endless set of iterations of artistic creations based on that single image. And that would change every day according to two variables, the first being the progression of time, and the second being the interaction of the public with that image in the collection. Another colleague, Drew Baker, who is based in Australia at present, but he's a leading humanities scholar and researcher that does digital archaeology and virtual reconstructions of heritage sites. And what Drew and I did was take the static 2D plans that David's server application was generating each day and take those 2D assets and extrude them into 3 dimensions in a real-time virtual game environment. So this idea of taking the map and creating a real city from it.
So that is Imaginary Cities. And so we can see through the projects that I've shown you today the way that people who have very good intentions can use digital technology to create strong communities by allowing people to be more empowered, being more connected, having empathy, and having a greater sense of self-awareness. But of course, okay, so how do we do this? How do we make our museums stronger to be able to do these types of things, to have these kinds of projects? So I have 3 things that I would recommend in my role at Arts Council. And for those of you who don't know what Arts Council is the primary funder of arts across all of England. So probably in terms of the UK, it's kind of similar to the National Endowment of Arts. But the mission behind the Arts Council is to ensure that great arts and culture is spread across the entire country so that every community has access to great art. And so part of my job is, as a director of arts, technology, and innovation, is to make sure that innovation and digital technology, we're pushing that, we're supporting the next generation of artists, we're supporting museums and extending their content through digital technology. So I spent a lot of time figuring out what are the best mechanisms for supporting people in doing this type of work. And one of the things that we've really focused on quite, we've given a lot of attention is to data. So my first kind of recommendation is to become data advocates and activists and advocates. At the Arts Council, what we try to do is ask our arts organizations and museums to cultivate a data culture. And when I say data culture, I mean, use the data that you have within your organization, so making sure that that data that intersects and integrated. So taking the data that you have from retail, that you have from your exhibition tickets to your fundraising, and integrating that data to create a clearer picture of the people who are interacting as part of your museum community. But what we also do is support museums and arts organizations in sharing data. So we have something called the Audience Agency, and they have a tool called Audience Finder. And it's a platform in which all of our funded organizations can use a platform to collect their own data and analyze their data, but also share data with others so they can get a clearer picture based on their region, based on their type of organization. So what we're doing is trying to bring data together to empower the entirety of the sector, not just individual organizations or those that have the money to be able to do that. But in terms of data culture, we also have to think not only about how we leverage the existing data that we have, but it's really important that we are collecting data that recognizes the various diverse communities that might be interested in our collections. And I just wanted to show you Art UK. This is an organization funded by Arts Council, which is a completely digital organization. And their mission really is to document all of the paintings that are on show in public buildings across the UK. They're not museums necessarily, in public buildings. And so it's a repository for all that work. But they make it their mission to make sure that they're finding out, and they're doing something called an art detective, where they're allowing communities to generate new content and to give their insights about paintings that they may not know anything about. So this one is, obviously, they're trying to figure out who is this portrait of an African, who is this person, what did they do? And they've been actually quite successful in gathering information about this individual. So it's about using our systems, using digital technology to collect new types of data from people who may be marginalized in our system of research and scholarship thus far. Also, we have to be quite proactive in exploring the potential and future of machine learning and AI. I do believe that museums and libraries are going to be quite a big force in terms of the training data that will end up being used in artificial intelligence and machine learning, if we can find ways to consolidate all of the data insights that we have and deploy them in a way that machines can learn from them. But we have to be quite vigilant from the very beginning. So we can't just build it and then think of the rules that we need to guard against misuse of data and machine learning. We have to think about that up front. And actually, I'm really pleased because one of my colleagues from the UK, Una Murphy, is going to be here from Goldsmiths talking about her AI an ethics project for museums. And I think that's a really great initiative. And I really think that it's up to us to be guardians of how machine learning evolves for the best of the community. Now, I also want to talk about how we innovate in our organizations. Oh, I forgot to say this, sorry. There is the Alan Turing Institute, which is developing a new program called AI for Arts. And what they're doing is really thinking about all the different ways in which data can be drawn from digital images that can help support things like conservation, restoration, and our presentation of arts. And so I think it's really important that we are connecting with those who are doing research in these areas, academics who are doing research in these areas, to help shape the research agenda around AI. Now, back to innovation. So how do we foster innovation in our organizations? And how do we do that with the communities that we want to connect with? Well, in the UK, we have an organization called Nesta. And Nesta is all about, it's a non-governmental organization, a foundation that's dedicated to thinking about innovation and how we spur innovation in the public sector. So not in the tech sector, but in the government, in government and public organizations. And they have something that I think is really interesting. They've come up with 20 kind of tools for innovating in government. And a lot of that focuses on how do we engage communities in the innovation process itself. So how do we engage people at different levels, at different times? How do we engage their expertise? And how do we collect their opinions? And how do we test our prototypes? And how do we iterate with our communities? I wanted to bring up and raise one project that's actually not being done by Nesta, but by an organization that is funded by the Arts Council. And it's called Further Field. And what Further Field's trying to do is to create a system of voting. So it's called quadratic voting, and it's a system that they've titled Culture Stake. And what Culture Stake is doing is allowing the public to have a voice in what kind of culture they have in their communities. And so the way that quadratic voting works is actually, it's like everybody has $100, and you can place your $100 with whatever project you think is interesting. You could give $5 to one, 10 to another, or you could put the entirety of your 100 behind one project. And what that does is help gauge the intensity of interest that people have in particular projects. But they've also kind of linked that quadratic voting to blockchain ledger technology that will allow that voting and those decision makings to be very, very transparent in a virtual space. And they've developed these things called future fairs, in which they invite people to the future fair, and then they get the opportunity to vote on, artists can propose, organizations can propose different cultural outputs that they want, and citizens get to vote on those and get to help shape the future of what culture they have in their communities. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about partnerships and internal communities. So all of the projects that I highlighted today involve partnerships. And I really think as museums, what we have to do is make sure as a sector we don't stay too enclosed, inward-looking as museums, but we start to think about how our community can grow in terms of the partnerships that we have. Partnering with tech companies, partnering with creative agencies, partnering with researchers will all be super important to the future in terms of our development of new technologies and our ability to influence how digital technologies are made for the good of communities. But I also want to talk a little bit about internal communities. So in our museums, many of us here may be not at the top of our organization. We may not be CEOs or directors of our organizations, but we're working kind of in the middle of our organizations. And it can be quite difficult to influence when you're in those positions, particularly if you're in an organization that kind of says digital's over here and everything else is over there. And so one of the things I'm working on at Arts Council and in the UK is about how we create great and strong internal communities within our museums and our cultural organizations that see digital transformation as critical to the entire organization, not just one part of the organization. And so I wanted to highlight one project that we've been working on that will be launched fairly soon. It is called the Digital Culture Compass. So this is something that is developed by the Arts Council, and it will be rolled out at the end of this month, and it'll be free to anybody in the world who wants to use it. It's an online tool. And what it does is it starts to get organizations to think, how does digital technology influence our overall strategy and mission? You know, it's not just important that you don't have to be good at everything when it comes to digital. It's about identifying what are the key things that you can do in terms of digital technology that can help you reach your mission and goals. And so it's an assessment tool that will take you through a number of areas of functions within your museum, whether it's marketing, whether it's exhibitions, and it goes all the way up to governance and strategy. And it takes you through a series of questions. But these questions cannot just be answered by the head of digital or the digital person in the organization. This has to be done collectively. And I trialed a beta of this in Norway, in Oslo, Norway. There's a new museum. The Munch Museum is moving into a new space. And they're very keen to deploy digital technology in new ways to connect people with the artist Munch. And so I worked with their team, which was a cross-disciplinary team of people from different departments within the museum, to try to answer some of the questions that are in the digital culture compass. And what was really, really interesting was, obviously we've got a digital tool here, but it was really about the discussions we had in the room. There were some things that everybody had consensus about in terms of the direction of the museum and what things were going on in terms of digital development. But there are some things that people just had no kind of sense of visibility of what's going on in the museum, and what the opportunities were and how they could work together within their own museum. So Digital Culture Compass, we hope, will be a tool that will be used and be helpful to those people who are trying to lead digital transformation in their museums, but struggle to get that kind of consensus and group kind of buy-in to push forward new ideas in terms of innovation in digital technology. Now, I have to say, so when I was looking at the program for this conference, I was really pleased with the breadth of what was going on, what was on offer today. And certainly I think my presentation touches on several of the key strands that are going through this conference in a lot more detail. So I feel great about that. I'd have to say that I'm really excited now to go on to the rest of the conference, because I think really this Museums Computer Network is a great community in and of itself. Seems a very strong community from the introduction we got this morning. And I think if we work together and really engage with these topics around digital technology and how we can create communities that have empathy, that have connectedness, that are empowered, I think we could be very helpful to the sector and very helpful to the communities around us. And so with that, I will wrap up. Thank you very much. I'm not sure how much time I have, sorry. Okay, sure, okay. So it looks like we have some time for question and answer. So I'm really happy to talk more about the projects highlighted or the Arts Council. So there's a woman right here with the blonde hair. The tool, so interestingly enough, so we were supposed to launch it on November 25th, so the end of this month, but as you may or may not know, we're going into election period in the UK, and so we're in something called PERDA, which means we can't launch or announce anything until the election. So I would say now this is probably going to be launched at the end of December. But I'm really happy to circulate it via whatever channels, the link to it, so you could use it yourselves. And I would love to hear your feedback on it. Question. Any other questions? Oh, there's somebody, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the Forever project.
Yeah.
Do you know any information or thoughts or strategies about the sustainability of the digital asset that you are creating?
So that there is an organization called the Forever Project Organization, and they would have the information about that. I don't know so much about how they are archiving or saving their assets, but I know that they have, if you go onto their website, they are, like I said, they're expanding this project outside of Holocaust survivors, and they're really thinking about, like they're working with the football museum and thinking about football players and archiving and creating interactives with football, and they're working with the National Portrait Gallery and thinking about the future of portraiture. So I'm sure that this is something that they've thought about, the archiving and the preservation aspect of it. I'm happy to put you in touch with them if you're interested. There's a question there and a question there. There was a... I'm
coming. I'm just slow. Thanks. Hi, Hi. You spoke about how institutions like museums and libraries need to be aware of kind of the morality and ethics, I think, of AI.
Yeah.
I was just curious if you have any thoughts about things we could do to make sure it is used responsibly.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, I really do think it's about us engaging more proactively with technology companies and also engaging quite proactively with research. So the system is quite a little bit different in the UK. We have research councils and I think probably clearer channels to influence research. But I think partnerships with universities and I think partnerships with tech companies in which we're actually engaging. So, you know, tech companies will want to create things that sell. They'll want to create things. And I think if they're involved in more partnerships with different types of stakeholders, they'll think more carefully about how they're making and using data, machine learning data. So I think it's really important. It's us creating a larger community outside of museums to be able to have that agency to influence how our data is going to be used in an AI environment. There was a question here. Sorry, I can't see you because you're right in the light.
Matt Tarr, Museum of Natural History and board member.
Yeah.
Just a quick reminder, the microphone is an inclusionary device, so let's use it just because it helps me hear. But you're amazingly positive, and I really appreciate that. I've been, working in technology for 2.5 decades or so, and I guess I would ask you, like, is that are you really that positive, or like what are our chances of surviving this current sort of madness right now, where everything seems so dire and negative?
Yeah, I mean, I am that positive actually, only because I love being part of the art sector and I love being part of museums and culture, and I think there's people with such good ideas. And I don't think we get the credit in our sector for being the people who come up with really great ideas, but we're really also very thoughtful people. And I think if we can support and elevate each other and feel slightly more open to engaging with the outside world and influencing the outside world, I do think we can overcome these things. Because I think, working in museums and working in the arts is not just about the output. There's a value system that I think we work to, that I think is a very important value system that we should be trying to use that value system and influence sectors outside of ourselves. So yes, I do. I am positive and optimistic.
Hi, Tonya. Effie from the Smithsonian, and I really enjoyed your point about the need to think about the ethics along with doing better about aggregating data. But one thing I'm really concerned about is the biases in our own data that we're dealing with. So what's your, any examples we can look to? What do we need to do?
Yeah. I completely agree with you, and that was part of my point about being data activists, is about the data that we collect and understanding that there are holes in our data and that there are people who are left behind in the data that hasn't been collected, and that we don't want to reinforce that through machine learning and AI. We don't want those kinds of gaps to be then embedded in machine learning and artificial intelligence applications. Now, I think there are academics who are working quite hard on creating systems of AI in which kind of gaps in information are identified. And I think it's just really important for us to just be, as we are starting to think about different uses around AI, and this is why I think it's really important that we are on the ground in terms of working with researchers who are developing things in this area, because we will be able to identify the gaps. We will be able to kind of say, actually, this training data is not complete, or it's going to lead to a certain outcome that we may not want. And so I think it's just important that we stay really engaged, again, and stay on the ground in terms of the research that's being developed and the technology that's being developed. Any other questions? Well, I'm really, really, really happy to answer any questions about the Arts Council and what's going on in the UK during coffee breaks or anything like that. And I just want to say how excited I am to be here and how excited I am to hear from you as this conference goes on. Thanks a lot. Yeah.